Professor Sholmit Elmog, and I'm going to talk with the author Scout Toro about some law and literature issues and about his books. Scott, let me start with this question. I see your books as a representation of a paradigm which I call the literature alongside law paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
This paradigm has two stages. The first one deals with exposing legal failures,
Mm-hmm.
the impossibility to reach justice, real justice, the mistakes, the disappointments that are all inherent to law, which literature reveals to us. The second stage of the paradigm takes us to the hope, in spite of the failures,
Mm-hmm.
in spite of the eternal quest that never ends. There is hope within the law, and it is a phenomenon we can never abandon.
Mm-hmm.
Let me explain about the failure. In one interview, I read that you said that if the crime is bad enough, the jury is not going to acquit.
Mm-hmm.
In another place, you said the fact that there are 1,500 people on death row
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that all these people deserve to be there.
Yeah.
So this is a failure. Those are failures that you often describe in your
Mhm.
books. Now, would you say that one of the main means in which we might strive to get better,
Mm-hmm.
to overcome this failure which are inherent to law, is literature? For example, your books. And I'm thinking about the Hernandez case that
Mhm.
also got a narrative representation in your work.
Right. First of all, I agree with your paradigm. And I have often said that if there's a single dominating theme in my novels, it's the failure of the law. That, but on the hope side, on the second part of the paradigm, I say that I hope that the books still show the law as a noble enterprise, and the goal of the law, which I hope I present, is to make the little bit of life that human beings can actually control more fair, and that is why I see the law as a noble enterprise, because you can't. There is no justice when you talk about disease, but if we talk about our social circumstances and what we can adjust, then yes, we certainly all have ideas of fairness, and hopefully the law includes them.
Would you say that literature promotes this chance to fairness?
I don't. I think literature, and one reason the failure of the law is a good theme, I think literature is always about ambiguity and contradiction. And it's not about, rules and statutes that make, a hard-edged determination. Literature exposes the ambiguity and uncertainties of various situations. The other thing, of course, that's always operating in my novels is to show the way personal relationships actually influence the law, even though the ideal of the law is that it's completely impersonal.
So what literature shows is something that law cannot show. Actually, that law must hide in a way.
Absolutely. I often talk particularly when I'm talking about law and literature, about what the law cannot say, including the fact that in hard cases, the law comes down with a rule. And the authority of the law depends on not acknowledging how powerful the arguments are on the other side and how difficult it is to make a particular decision.
Yet, I think that we must have another channel in which to present all the things that law cannot reveal. And that's the paradigm of the literature alongside law, which is essential not only for literary reasons, but also for law.
Right.
In order to enable law to function better.
Well, it's what you're saying is certainly true. I'm not sure that the law itself is ready to acknowledge the role of literature.
I'd agree there are many reasons, but let's proceed to my other question. Most of your books give a central place to the legal proceeding.
Mm-hmm.
And to a narrative about the legal proceeding, a narrative which is very intricate and elaborated. And even today, within the public eye, I think that legal proceeding represent the law at large.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that this huge global interest in the legal proceeding is linked to the way in which legal meaning is constructed.
Mm-hmm.
We all over the world know how legal proceeding looks like.
Mm-hmm.
If we'll see a legal proceeding in any other country, even without understanding what is being said, we will know. If we see the picture, the setting,
Right.
we'll know that we witness a
Right.
legal proceeding. Because we know the poetics of legal proceeding. We know the poetics of courts, and it's similar all over the world.
Right.
You know, the old common law maxim, justice must be seen to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And it is seen in the courts of law. That's where we see justice. We see it during public proceeding that is being conducted against to a procedure that we all know about ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Is it going to change? Is everything about the legal proceeding is going to change? There are 2 points here that I would like us to think about. One thing is the change that are linked to narratives, to long, elaborate narratives that take their times. I think that in our digital age, where Twitter, for instance, is central poetic platform,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps there are some softwares that produce pieces that make reporters and editors redundant. How long can we keep on going with long traditional legal stories that take their time? This is one point. Let's talk about it, and then.
Are you saying in the courtroom?
Yes, that even in the courtroom, we are still using this form of the long argument, the long
Right.
elaborate argument. There's a dissonance between the zeitgeist
Yes.
and what is happening in courts.
I agree that there's a difference between the zeitgeist and what's happening in the courtroom. But, you know, I find it hard to conceive of how a closing argument in a case can be
Twitter-like.
reduced to a tweet.
Maybe we'll have to do it to learn how to do it. if foreign policy can be tweeted.
You know, I haven't thought about this before, so I'm puzzling it through as we speak. And I'm thinking about...
To put it simply, everything will have to be shorter. Quicker and shorter.
Well, that presumes that people don't have patience or the attention span.
Yeah, for long stories.
And I am not willing to indulge that. And in point of fact, let me take the other side on this.
Okay.
That if you look at American television, for example, and what is going on with it, in point of fact, people seem to prefer these multi-episode stories that are longer than feature-length films. Someone was talking to me about the HBO series The Night Of, which is eight episodes following a murder case. And to some extent, there's a hunger for depth.
Yes, but they consume it whenever they want.
Yes.
Which brings me to the other point.
I mean, are we going to have proceedings where they're taped and the jury watches it at their leisure? Maybe.
Yeah, for example, or the traditional proceeding that is being conducted along the lines of this very, very old poetics. Is it still relevant now in our age? We have new ways to get information and data, and everything is about managing the data. There are algorithms that we can reach decisions about probability with.
Right.
The need to be in one time and in one place is redundant. Is it really, do we really need this old performance in courts? Do you have, or can I ask you if you can find within yourself a feeling about the poetics that the legal performance is going to? And is it going to affect legal thrillers?
Well, whatever changes in the law will certainly be reflected in, the fiction about the law.
Can you imagine new courts, new kind of proceedings?
Well, things have changed.
Fundamentally different from what we know?
Things obviously have changed with technology. The way that evidence is presented and, is very visual now and digital. And American judges are even allowing closing arguments to be augmented with essentially little movies or advertisements that get shown to the jury during the course.
And if you are permitted, you must do that,
yes,
because
so
if you don't do that, you disadvantage your client.
Right. Well, if the other side's doing it, you better be doing it. So there's, and there's changes in the way the court reporter takes down the evidence. But let me just take the other side of this and say that performance itself, the idea of being in the theater and witnessing the performance of the actor, or on the other side, the witness, that goes back many thousands of years. And so my initial response is that it's hard to imagine conducting a legal proceeding without bringing the witnesses in front of the people who are going to decide whether that person is telling the truth. Someone was suggesting to me yesterday that it's possible to have an algorithm which will decide cases in court.
Yeah, this is an idea many people toy with.
And,
there's writing already about it.
And I can certainly see, like, the algorithm plowing through, for example, the evidence in an antitrust case. But I don't know how the algorithm will be able to make determinations of credibility, which are traditionally based on the way a witness responds to interrogation.
Maybe you can measure it digitally, electronically nowadays?
Well, you can, right? That there are certain visual responses that are classically associated with lying, for example. The problem is there are, when you start talking about the police, at least in the United States, they have mastered all of those. They do not engage in the typical, we would say, tell that reveals that somebody is not telling the truth. And they, whether they're telling the truth or they're lying, they present exactly the same way. So I'm not sure technology can see through that.
Technology can, for example, overcome the problem of corruption, of problems of prejudice that you often describe in your books.
Yes, yeah.
Could give us an impartial way.
Well, you can, let's talk about picking a jury, for example. Technology can certainly deliver far more data about the potential jurors than what we get in American courts through the jury questionnaire. And as soon as you've got somebody's name and where they live, you can do Google searches and very complex investigations of them instantaneously as you're sitting in the courtroom and get information that was unavailable to lawyers traditionally in picking a jury. And again, you can then feed that information into your algorithm. You don't need the jury consultant. That algorithm would be able to make predictions about how that person will respond to certain issues.
What would you say about such an option?
I think I'll hazard a guess that it's happening right now. If you can use a jury consultant, and in the U.S. you can have literally a psychologist who's sitting there whispering in your ear going, see the way she's tapping her finger, she's nervous about something.
Yeah.
You probably can use the jury consulting algorithm.
What has justice to do with that, I wonder? But if we are talking about jury, there's another option that comes to mind. There's an old American movie which is called Citizen's Verdict.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about it?
No, I'm not familiar with it.
It is about a governor in Florida who decided that instead of using a jury, he will use the citizens of Florida. Because if the idea is that juries are representing the American public, if you can get the public itself, you don't need representatives.
Yeah.
So
leaving aside the Constitution, but
let's leave aside the Constitution. But it depicts a very a very interesting story of a proceeding which is being televised to the nation, and then people have to give their verdict like in a reality show, actually. Instead of the jury.
Yeah, like American Idol, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And I must say, there is something compelling about the idea. I mean, a jury is a substitute to the public.
It is, but it's a broader sample than the people who are home, in the middle of the afternoon, watching voluntarily. I don't.
So the sample is better.
Supposedly with the jury. I'm not, jury selection is a vexed subject, and there are different ways of doing it. In Australia, for example, they just take the first 12 people and put them in the box. And they do a little interrogation to make sure somebody is not insane, but that's it. You just get the 12 at random, and there's something to say for that, as opposed to what goes on in the United States, where you're literally trying to shape the jury so that it will decide for your side.
Yeah.
Which strikes me as kind of an abuse of the system. It always has.
It sounds like that.
I mean, imagine if you could pick your judge, right? Nobody would think that's a fair system.
Yeah, you know that we don't have jury.
I know you don't, but you do have you do try cases to a judge, right?
Yes, and the sides cannot pick their judge,
right?
Of course.
But what if you could? What if you got 6 names and you got to strike 3 of them off?
Okay, perhaps in that case, I would say that algorithm is better.
Yeah.
For achieving justice.
It might be
better than jury and better than professional judges.
It might be. It's hard for me to foresee an algorithm
the future of
being
law.
that nuanced today. Where it'll be 10 years from now, I have no way to predict. We all know that things in the technological realm have moved forward at blistering speed.
I'm going now to your books.
Okay.
I want to ask you about Kindle County.
Yes.
Is it Chicago? Is it a representation of human society at large? And why does this so American county? I read somewhere, I'm quoting now, a hodgepodge megalopolis of city and suburb prosperity and blight. How can it manage to be a focus of continuous interest worldwide?
Yeah, well...
Not an easy question, I know.
Well, I mean, it's like...
Let me just, and even as we mentioned before, in places where the system is very, very different from the American one. For instance, here where we don't have jury.
Right. Kindle County came about by accident. I started writing Presumed Innocent while I was a prosecutor.
How many years ago was
Oh,
that?
boy. I started writing Presumed Innocent probably around 1979. And I did not want to be writing about my own workplace. I wanted to write about a prosecutor, but I wanted there to be some distance. So I looked back to my experiences as a law student when I had worked in the district attorney's office in Boston. And so originally I thought I was writing about Boston, but I don't keep a journal. If I have feelings and thoughts and that I want to memorialize, I put it in the fiction. So that means that as I worked as a prosecutor in Chicago, this city that was supposed to be Boston originally began to look more and more like Chicago. But it wasn't either, because I had constructed it on the supposition that the city was about 1 million people, whereas Chicago's close to 3 million, and the metropolitan area was 3 million in Kindle County, and Chicago's close to 8. So, and I didn't want to pick. So I just said, okay, it's an imaginary place called Kindle County. And the strange part is that, I felt so much at home there. The books tend to be interrelated in that a character from one book who appears in the background moves to the foreground in a later book. So with Presumed Innocent, Sandy Stern was the defense lawyer. The second novel, The Burden of Proof, focused on Stern as the protagonist. So, I don't want to say I was stuck in Kendall County because I like it there, but it may have great meaning in terms of the books and what makes the books appealing.
I'm sure it does.
But it's like so much that happens in writing, which is that it's not conscious. You know, it feels right to me to be there.
And it's got a character of its own.
It does. It absolutely
place.
does. But it's not a product of great deliberation. It's a product of, my own instinct about what feels right.
And why do you think it became such an interesting location worldwide?
The phenomenon of the city is not isolated to the United States. Wherever you are, whether you are in Tel Aviv or you're in Jerusalem or you're in Tbilisi, where we were last week, or in New Jersey, the challenge of the city is always to have a variety of people and activities, many of them sort of at odds with each other, coexisting, and everybody managing their life in the same place, and yet isolated from each other at the same time. So it's and the challenge of urban living, which is how many of us live. Probably most people in Israel live in cities. I don't know. Certainly most people in the United States live in cities. That is a universal theme, the challenge of urban life.
It is, but for me it is still something I have to decipher, or should be deciphered, this the Americanization thing, how American things become an icon of the global phenomenon.
Right.
Like law in American environment becomes law for Afghanistan,
Right.
for I don't know, for Europe. Law and Order is being televised all over the world.
Right.
Whenever you open television.
Right.
So it's not that simple. There must be something in the American way of depiction the legal issues that makes it so appealing.
Well, I mean, that is where the jury comes into play, because in the U.S., if you're talking about the potential for a trial, you always have to think, how are we going to be able to explain this to a lay audience, so-called ordinary people?
So it's simplified.
So there always have to be channels in the law that are going to allow it to be basically comprehensible to a popular audience.
Yeah.
So because we have to think of the law that way, that does make us more prone to write stories that will also be comprehensible to a general audience.
That's a very, I think it's a very interesting explanation, which I never heard before. I find it convincing.
Well, I have never thought of it before, so I'll have to keep pondering that. But that does go to answer the question of why these stories have been able to be exported. Leaving aside the separate issue you raise of the Americanization of everything, which is also
an issue.
It's obviously an issue, and I never am at a loss to understand why people resent that. Of course they do. There's a lot in their own culture that's very valuable, and it doesn't need to be obliterated by Starbucks or McDonald's.
It's hard to compete sometimes with the abundance of cultural representation.
Right. I mean, let's face it. You know, Hollywood has control of the machinery.
Exactly.
You know, and we make movies mostly about ourselves, and that's where the gigantic investment goes. And if film or television have an inherent power, which they do, by controlling those media, we are controlling the cultural conversation around the world. I mean,
maybe this is also going to change in our digital age, because the possibilities for independent production are getting wider.
they are.
And much of the content now is being produced not in Hollywood
Yes.
or by corporate,
Right.
but by individual that somehow manage to get to be heard all over the world.
Well, you can look at YouTube as
Yeah,
being
exactly.
an example of that.
Yeah.
Of, you know, personal productions that I'm sometimes, when I see stuff on YouTube sometimes, I'm just amazed at its sophistication.
Sometimes it's so funny.
And it's funny, and there was a play in a football game that I thought the referees had made a bad call. So I wanted to look at the replay of it on YouTube. In a period of 12 hours, people had put together such sophisticated films, time-lapse and slow motion and close-up and, you know, captions and music. It really is stunning. So yes, the control is in individual hands to make to make more content, and we'll kind of have to see where that goes. But you know, the internet phenomenon, the YouTube phenomenon, still, it's a stepping stone to television and the movies.
And this brings me to my last question.
Okay.
What is the future of writing, of storytelling, and of reading? Not in terms of platform,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of substance.
Mm-hmm. Well, the novel, just in its peculiar form, has been around since the 18th century, and certainly narrative, storytelling in words has been around a lot longer than that.
Yeah, orally.
So, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I think narrative is essential to our moral consciousness. It allows us.
I totally agree.
It allows us to imagine what it's like to be somebody else, and therefore,
And being ourselves at the same time.
right, and thus to answer, the question always posed in the Golden Rule, which is to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So we figure out what it's like to be somebody else, so that we hopefully are more morally conscious creatures. So narrative it's within us. It's like the opposable thumb. It's part of being human. But the particular means by which stories are going to be told and delivered, I can't begin to guess. There are some people who would tell you that a new narrative form has already emerged, which is the video game. And I know next to nothing about them. I have a son who, has a degree in educational video games, and he can tell you a lot about it. But so I don't really know if it's an emerging art form or not. I'm impressed by the technology, of course, but something I'm pretty sure something else is going to come along.
Yeah, the social networks are producing for us countless narratives every day, mini narratives, if
Correct,
you like.
absolutely. But I don't think reading is going to die. That
Reading in the sense that takes place today.
well,
Like
the relationship between
immersing oneself in a book
Right.
for many hours, isolated from any other connectivity.
I don't think that is going to die. I am not going to predict that reading will be as widespread in the next generation as it is now, just as it may not be as widespread now as it was before. But it is an experience that enough people treasure that I know it's going to continue.
I think that the future of reading is linked to the future of law, and in particular the legal proceeding. That it is impossible to separate between
Well,
the two.
You're certainly right that both that literature and the law are subject to the kinds of historical factors that you've been talking about. But I can't envision what has not yet happened. And so I won't shake my head and sound like an old man and go, oh, no, it's always got to be this way. But it's hard for me to imagine, when you talk about the legal performance, a justice system that will function without that. It may be augmented in some way, but the immediacy of seeing a witness on the stand, it's hard for me to imagine how you're going to construct a truth-finding system without it.
Well, I share your hope that the essence of writing narratives and reading long, well-constructed stories will stay with us for many, many centuries.
I hope. We'll see. But, the stories may be different. The metafictions that allow for 6 different endings, or even, where a story branches in 6 different directions in the middle. Those, I don't know if people will find those forms satisfying or not. The problem with them is that when you get essentially 256 different narratives contained in one book, you don't get the same universal experience when you show E.T. to half the people in the world.
Well, I look forward for your next work of fiction.
Thank you very much. I do too. I always say I look forward to it too. So.
And I thank you very much for this
Shulmit.
fascinating talk.
Thank you very much.